Welcome to the Pan Am Podcast, brought to you by the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York. This podcast and our museum are dedicated to celebrating the legacy of the world's most iconic airline, Pan American World Airways. My name is Tom Betty, and I'm the host of this program. Thank you for joining us. The Pan Am Museum Foundation is a non-profit organization. Please visit our website for more information at thepanammuseum.org. Again, our website is thepanammuseum.org. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. If you are using Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving a review. It will help others discover this program. This podcast is sponsored by the generous personal support of Mr. Adam Aaron, the CEO and chairman of AMC Theaters. He is also president of our sister organization, the Pan Am Historical Foundation. If you're not familiar with Pan Am, welcome. We are honored to have you here and for you to learn about what we're all about. If you already know of Pan Am, worked for or flown on the airline, or just love our history, it's good to be with you again. So with that, let's get this episode in the air, so to speak. Welcome aboard your Pan American Jet Clipper. In this episode, we are joined by Bill and Diane Studeman. Bill is the perfect example of a Pan Am kid, and Diane was a Pan Am stewardess at the peak of the jet age in the early 1960s. But before our interview, we're going to tell the story of Bill's father, Oliver J. Studeman, a Pan Am man from the very beginning, and explore three places that don't get nearly enough attention in the Pan Am story: Brownsville, Texas, Treasure Island in San Francisco Bay, and Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. So let's get started. There is a photograph I keep coming back to. It was taken in 1972 at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. A man is standing with his staff from the Pan Am Metropolitan Air Facilities Division. He is retiring after more than 4 decades with the airline. To his right, almost as an afterthought in the caption, is a younger man named H.V. Pat Riley, who would go on to become the founding executive director of the Aviation Hall of Fame and Museum at Teterboro. The retiring man is Oliver J. Studeman, vice president of Pan American World Airways. He was professionally known as O.J. Studeman, however his friends and colleagues called him Stude. He started flying tri-motored Fokkers out of Brownsville, Texas in 1933, hauling mail through the Sierra Madre for 14 passengers at a time. He ended his career with the title of vice president in a biography that touched nearly every division of the airline he gave his life to. He also had a son. That son, born in Brownsville in January 1940, would grow up to serve as Director of Naval Intelligence, Director of the National Security Agency, and Deputy Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, twice serving as its acting director across 2 presidential administrations. At his Senate confirmation hearing, Senator Frank Murkowski said he had, quote, mastered as few others have the intricate and arcane world of signals intelligence, end quote. That resume and the senator speak for themselves. But before all of that, back in the summer of 1962, he was a 22-year-old college graduate working at the Pan Am ticket counter at London's Heathrow Airport. And he met a girl. But let's talk about his dad first. O.J. Studeman won his wings as an Army Air Corps cadet at Brooks Field in Texas in 1930. 3 years later, he joined Pan Am's Western Division at Brownsville and began flying mail-carrying tri-motor Fokkers from Texas through Mexico to Panama, across the north coast of South America to Port of Spain, Trinidad. Maximum seating capacity on those early planes was 14 passengers. Food was boxed lunches, without exception. He was also among the first Pan Am pilots to fly a Boeing 307 Stratoliner, the first commercial aircraft with a pressurized cabin. By 1939, he had risen to chief pilot of the Western Division at Brownsville. From there, his career traced the full map of Pan Am's empire. He moved to Seattle as operations manager of the Alaska and Pacific divisions, then to San Francisco as operations manager of the Pacific division, overseeing the airline's transoceanic lifeline during the war years. After the war, he moved to Miami as operations manager of the Latin American division. Then came Cape Canaveral. Pan Am's Guided Missile Range Division was one of the least known and most remarkable chapters in the airline's history. From the early 1950s, Pan Am served as prime contractor for the U.S. Air Force's Eastern Test Range at Patrick Air Force Base in Florida, providing operations and maintenance for the missile and space program. O.J. Studeman served as assistant vice president of that division. The man who had flown mail over Mexican bandits in 1933 was now helping run operations for the American Missile and Space Program. After a period at corporate, he moved to Teterboro as vice president of the Metropolitan Air Facilities Division, overseeing Pan Am's vast infrastructure in the New York region. He retired from that post in 1972 and passed away in December 1985. His son Bill, who shared these details, offered the simplest and most fitting tribute. His father, he said, was a pilot's pilot. Now, those three places I mentioned earlier, Brownsville, Treasure Island, and Teterboro. Brownsville, in 1929, was the edge of the known world for American commercial aviation. Juan Trippe had just acquired a scrappy little Mexican airline that had been flying oil field payrolls over bandits in single-engine biplanes. The U.S. Postal Service had just awarded Pan Am Foreign Airmail Route 8, and Brownsville, sitting right on the Rio Grande, with Mexico directly across the river, became Pan Am's gateway to the South. It was not glamorous. The facilities were primitive. The weather was brutal. The terrain beyond Brownsville, the Sierra Madre Mountains, was worse. Pilots flying toward Mexico City through cloud cover were operating largely on instinct, and instinct in those days could kill you. It was here, at Pan Am's Brownsville base, that the airline began to solve that problem. A pilot named Edward Snyder became one of the first aviation professionals to systematically develop instrument flying techniques. He blindfolded trainees and put them in a revolving chair to prove that human senses were useless without visual cues. When Snyder died in an accident, a younger pilot named Harold Gray took over the work. Gray would go on to pioneer Pan Am's transatlantic routes and eventually lead the entire airline as Juan Trippe's handpicked successor. The instrument flying techniques born in Brownsville spread across Pan Am's entire system and ultimately influenced commercial aviation worldwide. Brownsville was also where Charles Lindbergh, Pan Am's technical advisor, landed a Ford trimotor in March 1929 to inaugurate the mail route from Mexico City, and where Oliver J. Studeman first fell in love with the sky. His son was born there 7 years later. If you've driven across the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge, you've passed it. Treasure Island sits in the middle of San Francisco Bay, a flat, improbable place that didn't exist before 1936. It was built entirely from film material dredged up from the bay floor by the Army Corps of Engineers, a joint project of the federal government, the city of San Francisco, and the Works Progress Administration. It was built for two purposes: to host the 1939 Golden Gate International Exposition and to serve as the permanent trans-Pacific terminus for Pan American Airways flying boat service across the Pacific. The Pan Am Terminal building constructed there is still standing. It is a striking piece of Art Deco architecture listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it currently houses a whiskey distillery as of May 2026. But when you walk through its doors, you are standing in the building where passengers bound for Hawaii, Midway, Wake Island, Guam, Manila, and Hong Kong checked in for their flights on the Boeing 314 Clippers, the most luxurious aircraft ever built at the time for commercial service. Pan Am called it the port of the trade winds. Departures were announced by ship's bells, 1 bell for crew, 2 bells for passengers. The experience was designed to feel like boarding an ocean liner, not catching a flight. But then the war came. The Navy seized Treasure Island in 1942. After World War II, the flying boats were retired from trans-Pacific service, and the airport that was supposed to anchor San Francisco's future in the air age never fully materialized. SFO was built to the south. The island became a naval training base. But the terminal is still there, and I encourage you to visit. Teterboro Airport in New Jersey is one of those places most people drive past without a second thought. It should get more than that. Teterboro is the oldest operating commercial airport in the New York metropolitan area. Aviation pioneers William O and Clarence D. Chamberlain, who made the second transatlantic crossing just weeks after Lindbergh, both called it home. Pan Am's connection to Teterboro runs through its Metropolitan Air Facilities Division, the operation that managed the airline's vast infrastructure in the New York region, and the division was eventually led by Oliver J. Studeman. Pan Am leased Teterboro Airport from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey on January 1, 1970, under a 30-year agreement, making it one of the few airports in the country actually operated by an airline. But perhaps the most lasting legacy Pan Am left at Teterboro has nothing to do with the airport itself. In 1963, Charles Lindbergh visited Dassault's assembly plant near Bordeaux, France, on behalf of Pan Am to inspect a new French business jet. He wired Juan Trippe afterward with a short message, "I've found our bird." The airline promptly ordered 40 jets with an option of 120 more in established Pan Am business jets to run its executive jet operations. Pan Am business jets eventually became the Dassault Falcon jet, headquartered at Teterboro Airport, where it remains to this day. The airline is long gone, its footprint at Teterboro is not. There's a photograph in Henry M. Holden's book on Teterboro Airport, part of Arcadia Publishing's Images of Aviation series, that shows Studeman at an event there, identified as Vice President of Pan Am, standing with aviation pioneers, county officials, and the Director of Aeronautics of the state of New Jersey. Another photograph shows his retirement in 1972 with a young Pat Riley standing to his right. For Oliver J. Studeman, Teterboro was his final chapter. For Pan Am, it was part of the vast, largely invisible infrastructure that made the world's most famous airline actually work. Now on to our interview with Bill and Diane Studeman. Now a bit more about Bill and Diane. Diane Jeanes grew up in Milford-on-Sea in Hampshire, England. Her father was a Royal Navy submariner during the Second World War and a policeman after that. He came from a long line of publicans from the New Forest in Hampshire, a family rooted in one of England's most storied landscapes. The Navy and aviation were woven into her life from an early age, and she understood, long before she ever put on a uniform, what it meant for an airport to be not just a transit point, but a world unto itself, a place with its own rhythms, its own culture, its own particular kind of glamour. Bill grew up as a Pan Am kid in the truest sense. His father was building a career that would take him from Brownsville to Seattle to San Francisco to Miami to Cape Canaveral, then to New York. His uncle on his mother's side also worked for the airline. Pan Am for Bill was not just a company, it was a family inheritance. He attended college in Tennessee studying history. He graduated in June 1962. That summer, he took a job at Pan Am's ticket counter at London's Heathrow Airport. Diane was working the TWA desk, and they met. Diane joined Pan Am as a stewardess after that summer, entering the airline at what many would argue was its cultural apex, when the uniform was a statement and the Clipper jet was a promise of something larger than the ordinary. Bill entered officer candidate school in 1963 and spent the next 32 years in the United States Navy as a naval intelligence officer, rising from deployments to the Western Pacific during Vietnam all the way to the directorship of the National Security Agency and deputy directorship of the CIA. Shortly after Bill became a naval officer, Diane hung up her wings to become a Navy wife and mother. They settled eventually in Annapolis. Today, Diane is active with the Garden Club of Annapolis, where she is past president. I had the privilege of serving alongside her on the Pan Am Museum Foundation's board for 4 years, and I've worked with Bill for the past 5 years in his role as chair of the advisory board of the Pan Am Museum Foundation. It's my great pleasure to welcome to the podcast, finally, after 5 years of talking about it, my good friends Diane and Bill Studeman. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you
very much, Tom.
Glad to be here.
So, Diane, you and I served together on the Pan Am Museum board.
We did.
And Bill, you are the advisor of the Pan Am Museum board. Let's talk about your story on how you met. Let's go back to 1962 and tell us the story.
So I used to work for Pan Am in the summertime at Heathrow all my college years. So I graduated from university in 1962 and was not going into the Navy until 5 months after that. So I went back to London Airport, where I had been a local hire as a ticket agent. And I arrived after doing my comprehensive examinations, got off the plane and walked into the transfer desk lounge, the interline lounge. And I met up with all of my old friends from the previous summers. And they were there. The Pan Am people and the TWA people were very close socially together. Our desks were together. So while we were separate airlines and in competition with each other, we were fairly close socially. So the first time I ever saw Diane, I walked into the transfer desk and the interline lounge there, and she was sitting at the transfer desk. And we were just introduced, working, of course, right. And I later, of course, was assigned to the transfer desk. And there's only usually one person each from each airline there. So we ultimately sat together most of the summer. It was us against BOAC and all the other airlines that were lined up down the way.
Well, we had a good working relationship. If I had a delay, with TWA, I would immediately let Bill know so that we could, put our passengers onto Pan Am and vice versa. He would let me know when Pan Am had a delay, and I would take your passengers on TWA.
There was a big laugh. Diane, I arrived from New York in the heat of the summer, and I was wearing seersucker suit cords back then, which was definitely not the fashion in the UK. And Diane made some comment about, who is this guy here in these clothes?
I was really surprised when my friends, welcomed this, stranger who had even stranger looking clothes on. Nobody wore cotton in the summer in England. You had some form of wool or whatever. And it was this pinstripe cord suit. And I thought, how strange these Americans are. And, who is he type of thing. So with a little bit of skepticism, I think, when I first met him.
When did things change and you're like, I kind of like this guy?
It wasn't really immediate. We had a very platonic friendship in that our work days were not like Monday through Friday. You would have 6 days on and 3 days off. So all the airline people would socialize together, that we would go to the pool together. We would go up to London and
To the
dance.
pubs out of the country.
And
Yeah.
Bill knew the best places were in little dives in the basement of places in London. And he had, was it a
Vespa.
Yeah, a little Vespa. And you could ask him anywhere in London where to go, and he knew.
But we would go out to 12th century pubs in the countryside surrounding Heathrow, the Heathrow area. Again, this is all the group. This is the Pan Am folks and the TWA folks all sort of together. Some of them were married, some were unmarried, and it was the summer passed very quickly.
Yeah, it sounds fun. I could just hear the 60s, early 60s music and see.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And this is the height of the jet age.
It was a wild time, but it was a very innocent time. We had just a lot of fun.
We both lived near London Airport. She lived down the road, just outside the boundary. I lived off the Bath Road in a bed and breakfast across the street from where the old original terminal was. When I originally went to work for Pan Am at Heathrow, I actually worked at the wooden World War II building where the international airlines were still there while the central area was being built.
Neat. So, Bill, you went home after the summer.
Right.
And then what happened after that? Because at some point, Diane, you decided to become a Pan Am stewardess.
Right. I could not become a stewardess until I was 21. Which I became in the October. And then I applied to Pan Am rather than TWA. Had I applied to TWA, I would have been based in a place called Kansas, flying domestically for the first 2 years. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to fly internationally. So I switched and applied to Pan Am in the fall and was interviewed and then came to the United States on February the 2nd, 1963.
So she came to her flight attendant school was at New York. I was passing through New York occasionally. I then went to Officer Candidate School, then down to pre-flight in Pensacola, and then ended up in intelligence school on the West Coast in Alameda while Diane was posted to San Francisco. So we were across the bay from each other. And she was in an apartment off now the famous Van Ness and Haight-Ashbury with 3 other girls, one American, whom we all stay in contact or track still. And I was at Alameda with a whole bunch of bachelors, and occasionally I would bring the bachelors over when they needed some morale boosting.
So, okay, let's rewind for a second. So, Bill, you left London to go back to the States after that summer.
Right.
Were you dating or were you friends when you left?
We were pretty much friends. I mean, I kind of knew where she was going. We kind of kept in contact. She came to New York. I was in Newport, so I was able to actually see her, I think, once or twice when I was in Newport. Then we went sort of, she went on to San Francisco. I went through the Navy route. 9 months later, I show up in the Bay Area.
Got it. And then when did you guys start dating?
Well, kind of during that time frame in San Francisco. The girls ultimately moved out of Haight-Ashbury up to Twin Peaks. I sort of got involved. We ended up with lots of side stories about acquiring a dog. Ended up in our family, of course. The girls had to have a dog.
He was our best friend.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I tried to be the part of the person to try to keep him safe, really, because I knew the other people that were in these apartments with her were people I knew from London.
Oh, neat. So it's kind of the same group that kind of carried over.
Yeah,
yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
Diane, when you got the job at Pan Am, what did your TWA friends say?
Oh, they came with me.
Oh,
I was on the flight with Judy Nichols and Fran Young, and Judy had worked with me at TWA, and Fran was on the counter next to us working for Pan American. We were all friends. We all socialized together. So our first apartment I had with Fran and Judy, and then Diane Nolan, who was the first American girlfriend.
And we still talk to her we still chat with her on video these days.
nice. Nice. So these are all lifelong friendships that you guys.
Exactly.
It all tracks back to the summer of '62.
Yes. And then also, Bill's dad just happened to be a VP in New York when I was going through, the stewardess flight training school.
Mm-hmm.
And he pinned my wings on me. I was very embarrassed at the time, but
Now, did he know that you were seeing his son?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
They had invited me to their home for dinner.
My parents lived in Garden City at the time, so
Nice.
so it was just cross tracking all the time, like it was fated, right?
Yeah, and we'll get back to Bill's dad in a moment, but Diane, let's talk about jet setting in 1962 as a Pan Am stewardess flying around the world. So tell us about some of your adventures.
Well, it was really the beginning of 1963. My very first flight was to Jakarta. It was a 2-week trip. Flying out of San Francisco, you had the vast Pacific Ocean. So we flew all the way through to Jakarta, through the Far East, down to Australia, and then polar flights to London. So I was able to get home to buy my Italian shoes, have my hair cut at Vidal Sassoon's, see my parents. And it was an age before you had movies on flights. The flights were long. We were not allowed to sit down. You just used the jump seats strictly for takeoff and landings. And for the rest of the time, you worked the flight. You knew every passenger. You helped with the babies, with the children. You asked the mother whether she would like to, be fed first. They were your most important, customer. Everyone dressed up. The women were in pantyhose, heels, dresses. I think they had discarded the hats, but certainly you wore gloves and, carried a smart looking handbag. None of this, carry-on luggage or anything like that. Everything was underneath in the cargo.
And you cooked all the meals from scratch.
On the airplane. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
Yes. First class was a 7-course meal. And of course, we had all the time in the world to give great service. You weren't rushed. It was a time before private jets. So all the stars would either fly internationally on TWA or Pan American. They had their favorites. And in the back, in the economy, we would cook scrambled eggs for breakfast. And that meant you cracked 266 eggs into little Dixie cups. And you had to be very careful because if you overcooked the scrambled eggs, they would turn a ghastly shade of green. And that's when you would see one of the stewardesses rush up to first class and grab a big bunch of parsley garnish and take back to put on the scrambled eggs to try and camouflage the strange color green.
And occasionally had to pick the eggs off the overhead ceiling when in the turbulence.
Yes, I did go through clear air turbulence, and I was cooking scrambled eggs, and I had just put the eggs, very runny eggs, into the pan. And the turbulence was so severe, my purser grabbed a hold of the back of my skirt and pulled me back down onto the jump seat. And I had not had time to close the oven door. Well, the turbulence got so severe that fluid eventually ended up all over the ceiling and then dripping from the ceiling. Unfortunately, most of the passengers were also quite ill on that flight, so they weren't expecting breakfast, which was very fortunate.
So speaking of celebrities, any celebrities that stand out to you that you want to share with our listeners, Diane, of your passengers?
Yes. My favorite being Cary Grant.
Oh, wow.
We had a lot of stars. Charlton Heston, sure. I remember. I don't know which movie he was preparing for, but he had a script, and he was the only passenger in first class coming out of London. And he just asked very politely just to have a steak and a salad, because he knew that we would go through the 7-course meal. He didn't want any of those trappings. I'm really busy studying, for this movie. So if you could just bring me, a steak and salad. But Cary Grant, bless his heart, I had him on 3 polar flights to and from London, and because his mother lived in Bath. Mm-hmm. And he is as debonair and as good looking, even more so than what you see in the movies. And of course, we were very reserved, very polite. We were not fawning. But he had a very good sense of humor. And on the first flight, of course, he was in first class, and he was at the back of first class, just before the bulkhead. And he put on the Pan Am socks, and throughout the flight, he would cross his legs, uncross his legs. And I had stopped by a little lady's seat about 3 rows back from the bulkhead. She tugged on my apron and she said, "Is it true that Cary Grant is on the airplane?" And I said, yes. And it was so cruel in a way. I didn't mean it to be cruel, but I pointed out where his feet were crossing and uncrossing. I said, "Those are Cary Grant's feet." Well, for the remainder of the flight, she remained focused on those feet. So I told Mr. Grant where she was sitting, and that she was so excited that he was on the flight. And with every flight that he was on, he would always take time to walk back into to the economy and stop and talk to people. Well, as he's passing this lady's seat, her head goes back, and he goes straight past her. And I was a little surprised and disappointed, because I thought, I did point out, the seat number and whatnot. But anyway, he came back and sat on her. So she was not expecting it. She did not see him walk back and he sat on the side of her seat. She was on the aisle, and he picked up her hand and put it in hers, and just had a lovely kind of, son to mother type of conversation that I know that was the highlight of her life, and that she loves recounting the conversation that she had with Cary Grant. And
Bill, do you remember during this time period when you would see Diane, would she tell you some of these stories?
Oh, yeah. Well, I get stories from all of the ladies because, they were all flying either together or separately. Yeah, there was never a dull moment. And I was, it was easy for me because I had school hours in Alameda. So all my other hours were free weekend hours except studying. So, and I had a car so I could boogie across. I was also the chauffeur, introduced them to American cuisine. There was a restaurant just down the road called Hippopotamus that made the thickest hamburgers in the world any way you wanted, from, far Asian to classic American.
Yes.
Bill, any stories that stand out to you during this period that was told to you?
No. I mean, I think the biggest story was one night, late afternoon, actually, the girls decided that they wanted to have a dog. And so I made a big mistake. I took the girls down to the city pound, and they allowed you to essentially see the dogs, but not buy them. They were no longer being sold. So we finally had to go down South Bay and acquire a dog. And it ends up that we ended up having this dog who lived 15 years with us. They were our kids' dogs, essentially. A little short-legged cross between a beagle and a dachshund. And Diane, we called him Chico, but Diane had formally named him Boeing. The name Boeing never caught on.
I love it. So, Bill, you are a Pan Am kid. You were born in Brownsville, Texas. You were only there for a couple years and grew up mostly in Florida, right?
Right.
But, I mean, Pan Am kid, your uncle, your mother's brother worked for Pan Am. And, of course, your father was a pilot for Pan Am and then rose through the ranks to be vice president. Let's talk a little bit about your early days, and then we can talk about your father. One of the things to our listeners that Bill and I have talked about for many years, we think that there are 4 elements of Pan Am history that's kind of overlooked. One is the land planes of the early days, the 1930s of Pan Am history. The other is Treasure Island in San Francisco, a man-made island that was constructed in the late 1930s for the World's Fair. And we'll get to that in a second. The other is Brownsville, Texas, a big Pan Am operation. And lastly is Teterboro. So, Bill, let's start at the beginning and tell us a little bit about your early years and your father.
Well, so my father came to work for Pan American in 1933 as a pilot. He had been assigned to the Panama Canal to a composite squadron down there. And I only tell you this story because it does have a point. The composite squadron, my father was a fighter pilot, a pursuit plane pilot, they call it, but he flew mostly mapping and reconnaissance missions around Central and South America. The composite squadron also contained a bomber group that were flying Keystone bombers. These were open cockpit, early generation bombers. But the interesting thing about it was this composite squadron turned out to be a source of many Pan Am pilots. That came essentially, Pan Am must have gone down there or somebody recruited them, because my father came to work in 1933. But as I was growing up, all my friends in the neighborhood that were Pan Am captains in those days had been in the composite squadron. And they were kind of legends in the airline in many respects. So my father came to work for Pan Am in 1933 in Brownsville, Texas. He was a Texan. My mother was a Texan. Brownsville, Texas was the home of the Western Division headquarters. In late 1939, he became the chief pilot when he came to work for Pan American, he was flying the Fokker trimotors, and which were the original trimotors that Pan Am had at Key West, flying to Havana.
Mm-hmm.
Then ended up flying the Ford trimotors, which succeeded the Fokkers very quickly. Then DC-2, DC-3s, and my father ended up checking out on virtually every airplane Pan Am had in its inventory. It's an amazing thing to think about from 1933 to that era. In 1940, I was born early. Diane was born in late 41. You can calculate our age, but it's in the mid 80s here. And my dad was assigned to the Pacific Alaska Division in 1942. Now, World War II has started now, December 7th, 1941. We're assigned to Seattle. We live on a hill above the Renton Boeing factory. You look down and you could see nothing but netting. There was a barrage balloon down at the end of the block that the neighborhood people had to let out and pull in. My father flew, as well as was the operations manager of that division, flying DC-3s into Alaska, mostly under contract to the military. A lot of Pan Am's arrangements at that point in World War II were really contracts to the military. And you can read in the history about their big operations in Africa and on the West Coast. So, and virtually every place else. So then in 1944, after being in Seattle for 2 years, my father was assigned to be the operations manager of the Pacific Division. So you wanted to talk about Treasure Island. Well, obviously Treasure Island is a big naval place, but it has the history which you will recount here in a minute. But it was also the site of Pan Am's flying boat terminal there, a lovely Art Deco terminal.
It's still there. Correct?
Yes,
People
right.
can visit it.
Right. And but Pan Am was really toward the end of the large flying boat era. And my father was a land plane guy, so he spent a lot of his time really over at the San Francisco airport, which was just being built at the time. And so in anticipation of Pan Am's land plane operations. So he was there when they transitioned to land planes those days, DC-4s, et cetera, mostly, and flying out of San Francisco. In 1946, we moved to Coconut Grove, Florida, Coral Gables, Miami area. We rented a house owned by a legendary Pan Am captain, a guy named Lodi Lodison. Anybody has a book, read Lodi Lodison's Lodi Speaks, very cleverly written book, an amazing history, a Dutchman, of course. And we built a house in Coral Gables, and I lived in Coral Gables until I went off through my time in university. My dad then went to the Cape. He was the operations manager of the Latin American division during that period of time, lots of flying time. By the way, in a lot of my dad's flying era, when he could, I flew with him. I was actually able to fly with him. I flew downrange often, as far south as Argentina, Chile, et cetera, in the Latin American division around the Caribbean. So I went off to college. My father then went to the Cape to be the assistant vice president of the Guided Missile Range Division. Again, this is Pan Am touching the future of space travel, if you will. Sort of, Pan Am had the contract for running the Eastern Missile Test Range. So my dad was effectively the operations manager of the Guided Missile Range Division. Then he went to corporate, and when the business jets and the Metropolitan Air Facilities were stood up, he became the vice president in charge of that division, and he retired from there. But in that time, Teterboro was built up. Pan Am extended the runways, built new admin buildings. It really went from a small local airport to a proper airport that it is now.
And like we've talked about, those facts are kind of overlooked in Pan Am history. I mean, they're there, but you have to kind of look for them. So I'm glad that we're highlighting it on this program.
Yeah, the Metropolitan Air Facilities Division serviced the business jets division. And you might remember that Pan Am bought the Mr. Falcon and operated the business jets. The hub of that was at Teterboro, but they needed command and control, all kinds of services at the long-range destinations that the Falcons flew to. And the Metropolitan Air Facilities Division saw to all of that, the ground, the communications, the servicing, whether it was in the Pacific or somewhere in the Atlantic or elsewhere for the business jets.
And Diane, let's get back to your story. So you're flying around the world in luxury, having these wonderful passengers, including Cary Grant. And Bill is a smart guy, and he's like, I'm going to ask her to marry me. Tell us a little bit about that experience and also your decision to leave Pan Am and say yes.
Well, let me just say, it wasn't a traditional ask.
Oh, well,
So
there's a story here.
I was flying, using up all my disposable income to fly. I was at North Island Naval Air Station, San Diego at the time. She was in San Francisco. I would go up, she would come down. I would go up, she would come down. And on various and sundry weekends. She was in San Diego at one time when I actually was sent off on a TAD mission. And I'm going up the stairs of the airplane ramp, and she's standing there getting ready to take my car back and fly home to San Francisco. And she points at her ringer thing. I'm at the top of the ladder, and I give her the thumbs up. That was the proposal.
So actually,
she proposed.
I asked him,
when is this guy ever gonna, get in line?
And what was your rank at the time, Bill?
Give him a little shove.
Oh, I'm a Lieutenant JG at the time.
So Diane, you're like, this lieutenant junior grade is going to be my husband one way or another. And it's time to be a little bit more in your face. I'm going to point at my ring finger.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was growing a little impatient.
I tend to be a pretty shy person. So, I don't move very fast. As you can tell, with all my time with these ladies, I'm really trying to just, do the right thing. Mostly as service support, if you will.
So Bill gives you the thumbs up, Diane. And what happens next? How long before you decided to take your last flight on Pan Am as a flight attendant?
I believe that was in June. We were married the 12th of September.
In the UK.
In the UK. I only had enough time to order a wedding dress. It was... I remember I picked it up on the Saturday before we left San Francisco on Monday morning. So there was no time to do any necessary alterations. And then actually at that particular time, I just thought, it doesn't matter what I get married in. I just want to get married. Be a wife, have children. It didn't matter. Everybody else was concerned. But I got on the flight with my wedding dress. And at that particular time, the overhead, they weren't really bins. It was just a shelf. So I laid out my wedding dress, which probably took about 4 or 5 rows. And we were married in England. And fortunately, because his dad, Stude, worked for Pan American, there were as many Americans.
Your family was flying in from all over the place, friends. Mm-hmm. It was interesting. The church was just south of London Airport. When we saw it for the first time, the weeds were high, the gravestones were covered with, and with the guy who was going to preside over the service, the rector there had never done an American wedding. The church was right across the street from John Milton's house. He wrote all of his poetry. The church did finally clean up the yard, and because all these people were there, we had a wedding dinner the night before the wedding, and the priest got a little sloshed and barely made it to the service the next day. And then Diane's parents, who were Republicans, people who ran pubs, had a lovely reception in a pub on the Bath Road, right there where London Airport is on the boundary. And then we actually were delivered early on to London Airport, hours before our flight, and hooked up with all our TWA and Pan Am friends and partied until they poured us on the airplane to go to our honeymoon in Lisbon, Portugal.
That's great. It's what's interesting is that all the aviation people are connected, and this is such an aviation story in all different types of angles.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So even Diane's parents were associated with working on the boundary of the airport. So that whole area was, and everybody we touched were involved somehow or another with aviation.
Interesting. So, Bill, where are you in your career? So you're a lieutenant, junior grade, and when did you transfer to the USS Yorktown?
So I'm already in an air wing, which when it deploys is embarked in Yorktown. So the Yorktown was at the Port of Los Angeles and actually originally San Francisco. My squadron was at North Island Naval Air Station in Coronado, California, suburb of San Diego. So when the aircraft carrier would go to sea, we would fly out and join them. I was part of the air wing. I was the squadron intelligence officer, and I was in that squadron for 3.5 years, made 2 deployments to Westpac. Diane and I tried our best to meet up when we could because we fortunately had a nice vacation in Hong Kong together. After she told you, I think earlier that she had come to Yokosuka to join the ship. When she arrived at Tokyo Airport, a Pan Am exchange ticket agent, whom we knew from London, piled her in the Pan Am car and drove her to Atsugi Naval Air Station in the middle of the night through Tokyo traffic.
Wow.
We met up and we got up the next morning and we went down for breakfast and the squadron was there. And 2/3 of the way through breakfast, the announcement came over the loudspeaker in the officers club that will all members of Anti-Submarine Squadron 23 please report to the flight to the flight line. And there was the first mass deployment of Soviet submarines out of the Sea of Japan into the Philippine Sea, and we had to go basically ride herd on them.
Wow.
So the whole vacation there was interrupted. And then Diane joined us when we finally broke away from the Russians, and we ended up essentially making a port visit in Hong Kong. And then that's another long saga. But it's never dull when you're doing international travel, and one's in the military and one's not.
Yeah. And then, Diane, when was your last flight with Pan Am? 1964. How was that transition from being an international stewardess, having passengers such as Charlton Heston and Cary Grant, and now becoming a Navy wife? Tell us a little bit about that.
It went very smoothly. My last flight was on Christmas Day, which was memorable because everybody was in such high spirits. It was a fitting end to my 2 years of flying. I wanted to get married. I wanted to move on from flying. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I so appreciate the opportunity that I had. But my reality was to, as I say, be a wife and a mother. So my last flight was to Tokyo. And then, of course, Bill's explained what happened. I decided to fly back to my parents' home, see them for a couple of weeks before going back and waiting in Bangkok, keeping in contact with the embassy to find out when the Yorktown would pull into Hong Kong. And that was a grand sight. And then 6 months after that, we had our first child. So I was.
So we rented a little house in Coronado, California. And our first daughter was born 9 months and several days later in the Coronado Hospital. And we still have fond connections with Coronado. Diane's best friend, the wife of the Martin Baker ejection seat tech rep to the Naval Air Forces Pacific. She met her on the streets of Coronado the first day she was there. They're fond, fast friends ever since. And so, Coronado, we had 2 tours of duty in San Diego, both the times we lived in Coronado, California. Paradise, of course, in its own way. And left the squadron, ultimately then went to postgraduate school, came back to the Pacific, second time in Coronado. I was with the amphibs then, did 2 more tours. All my tours in those days were mostly in the far Western Pacific, mostly associated with the Vietnam War. Mm. So I did 2 tours with the carriers in the north and 2 tours with the amphibs in the south, mostly extended deployments. So theoretically, they were supposed to be 6 or 7 months, often ended up as 9 or 10 months. But it was professionally interesting. And then I was considering getting out of the Navy because I was stuck in the Pacific. And I told the Navy detailer we needed to go to Europe. And he sent us to Naples, Italy. And after that, we had 2 tours in Naples. So we had a career that was mostly associated with either Italy or with the Western Pacific. And then if you're an intel guy, you spend a lot of time in Washington. We had 1 tour in Norfolk at the Atlantic Fleet Command. But, and so just normal promotions from there on up. I was an intel professional, so I held intelligence jobs all over the intel community.
And Diane, this is the height of the Cold War, and your husband is doing some very important work safeguarding Americans and national interests. Were you ever worried about him on these trips?
Not really, because I knew that he could really take care of himself if he was ever shot down in Vietnam, for example, which he was. He came down. That was worrying. They called me on ham radio, which was really the only way to communicate back then. And you only had a few minutes to speak. But somebody from his sister squadron called and said, well, there's been an accident. Bill came down in a helicopter, but he's all right. Over and out. Thank you very much indeed. Over and out. And it wasn't until afterwards that you say, how on earth do you get shot down in a helicopter and not be injured in some way? So that was very worrying until I found out that in actual fact, he had made it out safely.
Well, it's the occupational hazard of being, in the military. But I don't think she worried. I was normally in a pretty safe environment. After the combat zones, I was in a domestic environment. I think the traffic in Naples, Italy was more dangerous than the airspace over the Toi Rap River in Vietnam. But I have lots of driving stories, so I don't, we had 2 tours of duty in Italy, one in Naples. We lived actually out north of Naples, so it was a combat experience just getting home and getting to work. And then we had a tour in Gaeta, Italy, which is a small Italian seaport about 50 miles north of Naples, which is the home port of the Sixth Fleet flagship. So we lived there. Domestic, it was a delightful tour. And our kids went to school. They had to come, to combat Italian driving tactics on buses going long distances. You had to have a lot of patience in those days. But, in driving in Italy I wouldn't say it's a contact sport, but I would have to say that it certainly is an interesting, experience. And unfortunately, you pick up some bad habits in the process of trying to deal with all that, So I still say that I do, drive fairly fast, but I do think that you become a safe driver as much as you can possibly be. I mean, we're still driving in our mid 80s, so I just took a group we met up with all these Pan Am stewardesses down in Southport, in North Carolina. And we got down there and back, and with 4 of us in the car. So, and in minimal driving time.
Let's get back to your story. So you were in Italy, and then what happened next? You said that you had a couple tours in DC.
Right. I went to Norfolk. Then from 1980 on, we lived in Virginia. All my tours were essentially here in town. So I worked in the Pentagon. I worked at NSA. I worked out at Langley, where CIA is located, and did a lot of traveling overseas. And so I had the senior officer experience. I was a director of naval intelligence for 4 years. So these senior jobs were interesting. I fought a couple of wars, essentially from those sitting positions, and just an interesting place to watch the world go by. Unfortunately, Pan Am had gone down by then, because Pan Am was such a big asset in the old days and had a wartime angle, flights out of, transport flights out of Vietnam, all kinds of other things that Pan Am was a national resource, as was TWA. So, and all the American airlines that participated with the military in these regional contingencies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it was probably very interesting in the 70s and the 80s being in intelligence, because that's the dawn of global terrorism, where terrorism really impacted all of the airlines in that time period. I mean, today as well.
One of the reasons why Pan Am, of course, probably ended up failing was Pan Am was identified.
We were a target.
So, yes. But, 1990, that was a seminal period of time. It's the end of the Cold War. It's the beginning of Desert Storm. Which is really the shift over to the Middle East. It's the Pan Am demise is all in that period of time. And so these are interesting. It's like time is compressed. And then, of course, after the Cold War was over, we went through this period of the global war on terrorism. Now, I'm retired by then, working for a defense contractor building reconnaissance and command and control toys for the military.
So, Diane, this is like an intersection of all your worlds: aviation, Pan Am, the Navy. Your dad served in the Royal Navy during World War II on submarines. Your brother was in the Royal Air Force as a pilot. And then you married a Navy guy. And then he happens to be a Pan Am guy. And then you worked for Pan Am. I mean, it's like all of these worlds are crisscrossing all over the place. Tell me about your first flight.
My very first flight was with my brother, who, as you said, was in the Royal Air Force as a pilot. He took me up when I was just 15 and performed aerobatics. A loop, and then straight into a barrel roll. And I had never experienced pulling G's before. I might add, he took me down to tea and served me sticky cream buns. So you can see what his agenda was here. But anyway, it was a dramatic and adventurous introduction to flying, but it certainly piqued my interest. And after that experience, my brother and I had greater respect for each other for different reasons.
This is in an open cockpit chipmunk. So if you can probably research that, you can see that both of them were sitting essentially out in the open like the 1920s, right?
Right.
So what was going through your head when this was happening?
At first, I had great admiration for my brother. I thought, my goodness, he is so smart. He's so clever. He can, pilot this plane. And then I realized the agenda that he had was to see if I could take it, wanted to get me ill. And it was with a great deal of pride when we came out of the loop and then into the barrel roll. There was probably a couple of seconds of silence. And then I said to my brother, Brian, I was not sick. That said it all.
That's a
Brian
great
would come
story.
to California, and I would take him up to Warner Springs to the glider field up there. And one day I took him up there, and he launched after he qualified at 8 o'clock in the morning. And he didn't come back, and he didn't come back, and he didn't come back, and he was catching thermals, and he didn't come back until after lunch, essentially on one flight flying over Warner Springs, California.
Cool. That's very cool. Which brings us to your family. We've talked about your family a little bit. And Diane, again, your father was in the Royal Navy. Your brother was in the Royal Air Force. You married a Navy Pan Am guy. And then your son ended up going into the Navy. So let's talk about your children.
We have 3 wonderful children, girl, boy, girl. The oldest daughter is a doctor. Michael, in the middle, is the retired Navy admiral. And our youngest daughter is with the government.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's 3 home runs. My word. What kind of doctor
Yes.
is your oldest?
She is now a pathologist, but she started out as a surgeon,
Surgical resident.
but realized that she would not really have a life. The hours were so long. She wouldn't have a family. She would be well published, but she would blink and she would turn around and be 65 and not have a family, but be a very successful surgeon. So she made a very courageous decision to go back to school for pathology. And now she is happily doing that and has had a son, one of our 4 grandboys.
Nice. And Bill, your son, Mike, is retired Rear Admiral, following in your footsteps in the Admiralty.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about that, and how do you feel that your son got the Admiral rank?
Well, obviously very proud. He's quite a specialist. He's in the public domain, so I can talk about the fact that he is an Asian specialist. He's went to learn Mandarin, and I graduated from Monterey, which is the Navy postgraduate school, with a degree essentially in Asian affairs. So that's his specialty area, and he continues to work in that area.
And I'm going to embarrass the Studemans for a second, because they're such wonderful, humble people, and they don't like to brag at all. But I am going to promote their son's book, Might of the Chain, Forging Leaders of Iron Integrity, by Mike Studeman, Rear Admiral, U.S. Navy, retired. And there is a link in the episode description to purchase this book. Tell us a little bit about how it feels to have a son that is a celebrated Navy man, but also now an author.
Well, first off, Michael has enjoyed writing for a lot of years, and actually he's quite a good writer. And the Might of the Chain is really a book about leadership. So, which is really his favorite topic, that and adventure racing, I have to say, which he's doing still now around the age of 60 years old. So
is this from that couple tours in southern Italy from your driving?
Yeah. No, I don't think so. But anyway.
But the authorship might come from when I was insistent that they all write a diary.
A journal.
Journal.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem was I never told Michael he can stop writing a journal, because to this day he writes a journal with photographs alongside. So writing is part of his life.
That's great. That's a great story. And how many children did he have?
Yeah.
They have adopted 2 boys.
Okay. So that's 3 grandchildren. And then we'll get to your youngest daughter. She works in for the government.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about her.
Well, she works in the area of supporting government budget related activities. And that's about the most I can say at this point.
But she's a single mom with a 14-year-old. So she's very busy, as you can well imagine.
Is there anything you'd like to add? Any trips, family trips that you went on that really stand out to you, looking back?
Well, no, we're fairly active. So we do sailing. All the kids sail or boat. We live in the Chesapeake Bay area, so we live on the water actually. So powerboat, sailboat, and the kids enjoy their sailing. All of them actually.
How about your grandkids? Do they like to sail?
They're more into sports and I think are serious, even academics. One recently graduated magna cum laude from Franklin and Marshall University, and is trying to make his way in the finance and economics area. And the others are essentially, one's married and one is working essentially also in the accounting area.
So looking back, your history with your father and your uncle, both working for Pan Am. Diane, your parents were involved with aviation, with pubs, and then you became a flight attendant. Looking back at that incredible period of time, what do you want listeners to know about that time? And why is this history important?
For me, there was really no other job that could come close to the satisfaction and responsibility for the safety and care of a cabin full of passengers. And it was a fun challenge to cook and present food as beautifully as possible in both first class, where 7 courses were served on a tray with white linens, crystal, and fine china, along with flowers for each tray, and in economy, a complete breakfast or dinner. Every passenger was an individual. Every flight was different. And one felt a great sense of pride to wear the blue uniform, only complete with the hat and the gloves, either short white for hot climates and 3/4 length black leather for cool. Representing the best, the most experienced airline in safety and service, Pan Am's logo was recognized worldwide, second only to that of Coca-Cola. Pan Am was the pioneer in aviation and set a high bar for quality. Pan Am represented the best in class. They set a high bar. It was an honor and privilege to fly with the best in design, safety, piloting, service on the ground or in the air. Its employees cared. Men dressed in smart suits. Women wore dresses along with high-heeled shoes, gloves, and carried smart handbags. Flying was such a special event. Passengers dressed in their Sunday best, and there were no carry-on bags. Pan Am's experience in pioneering aviation spanned 7 decades since the late 1920s, and it achieved the highest level of excellence in safety and service.
Well, personally, I'm a historian by degree and by avocation, if you will. I still do history. I work on even Pan Am related history. When we were on the board of the Pan Am Museum Foundation Board, we provide some money for the people still trying to find the Hawaii Clipper, the Pan Am Clipper that disappeared in 1938 in the Pacific. And so the museum has offered money to the Lost Clipper Group, another former group of naval intelligence officers who have made 5 expeditions out to the Western Pacific, essentially trying to search for the story around the Hawaii Clipper. So I think history is important. I still do active history, write history. I still mostly read history books. I'm currently reading the story of the Navy on the Roof Gang, which was the Navy Signals Intelligence Group established in the late 30s that essentially set the stage for the exploitation of the Japanese Purple Code and Enigma also in the Atlantic. So again, to me, national security history is particularly important. And I view Pan American as a national security asset, essentially, in many regards. But also, it was a great airline. It was my entire youth. As I said, I traveled a lot with my dad. My uncle, we were fairly close. He started out with my father in my father's era as a weight and balance guy and a load controller at Brownsville Airport. Ended up at Miami as the Latin American Division major dispatcher, and then spent decades in London as the chief European dispatcher. When I was there in London working, my uncle lived in Ascot with his wife and family. So again, everything that I did when I was growing up was all around Pan Am. And I pride myself on the fact that I went to work for Pan Am as a local employee. I interviewed and tried to do well, and then I was invited back 4 times, at London. One time at Tucumán Airport in Panama City. So I've lived the Pan Am sort of story in many different kind of guises here. And my father loved the airline, as you can well imagine. He I think had to. He predicted the airline was in trouble toward the end, and I'm sorry to say that he was right. But it's still one of the greatest stories in airline history that exists, and it needs to be told continuously. It has messages even for today.
Well, it was the ambassador to the world. It opened the world. Flying on that blue and white airplane and having it on the tarmac in some far-flung country, it meant that they had arrived. It meant so much to so many people. It was, the lifeline between where they were as a third world country and the hope of where they could be. I still remember, and it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it, as you were making your way down the runway for takeoff, the languages, 4 or 5 languages of announcements would just tell you, as soon as you had, boarded that aircraft, you knew you were on a world-class airline. All the different languages spoken. It was something to be very proud of. So it spoke to every passenger. It welcomed every passenger. It wasn't like the bus trip that it is, today. Maybe we helped that, in development. But back then, it was so very special, to fly around the world. Flight 1, Flight 2 with the Nisei girls speaking their Japanese. There was always someone that, no matter your language, there would be a flight attendant who could, see to you, converse with you.
But when they talk about Pan Am pioneering global civil aviation, it's a big story. When I was growing up with my dad, most of the airlines in Central and South America, the local airlines, were half owned by the country and almost half owned by Pan Am. And Pan Am would train their pilots. They would buy their airplanes. They would spec their cockpits. They would build their terminals and airports. they would build the navigation aids and the other kinds of things. If you go back and look at all that history, the Pan Air do Brazil or Companhia Mexicana or all these other airlines that grew out from Pan American, the Chinese National uh, Airways Corporation, the things that Pan Am did to expand aviation globally it wasn't just somebody who went out there to try to make money flying an airplane around. They were growing the industry. And it's too bad because the industry and industry-related policies ultimately were part of its demise. But it was grander than anything you might imagine as just a plain airline, a blue and white airplane, a blue and silver airplane flying around here and there. And those were really interesting times. I spent a lot of time with my dad. We'd get a call at home. There was a Constellation that couldn't get its nose gear down, circling around, Miami Airport. We'd drive out to Miami Airport and wait until the guys, got into the cockpit floor, cranked the nose gear down, and hoping it wouldn't collapse when he landed. And Pan Am built and spec'd airplanes for the Navy and modified a DC-3, and later on, that DC-3 became part of the naval transport, a Pan Am design, with a bigger engine and with encapsulated landing gear and all kinds of amazing things. They worked with the airline builders to design and build these airplanes that are the first offs that Pan Am had, that 707 that's behind you, or the 747. And these are really amazing stories that really nobody really understands when they look into the history of airlines. But they also did it with their fellow airlines. My dad was very close with Braniff, very close with Eastern Airlines, very close with American Airlines. They also had to do the daily kinds of things that managers had to do. They had to renegotiate contracts with pilots or even with flight attendants, cabin crews, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a big business. It still is a big business. It's a tough business. And so they weathered the storm for a long time, were pioneers in ways virtually nobody else was.
You haven't said anything about Charles Lindbergh being in your house.
Well, I grew up. Well, Charles Lindbergh was a Pan Am director at the time, but a lot of great people in pioneering people. I didn't ever see Amelia Earhart, but I certainly saw Lindbergh in and out of my house because he would come to Miami and would be feted for lunch and that sort of thing, and then my father would take him off and bring him home for drinks and dinner. Dan Morrow, my mother loved Dan Morrow, and she's a great lady. She loved her poetry, that sort of thing. It's amazing, really.
So hold on. For our listeners, let me just repeat this. Your father had Charles Lindbergh over for lunch? Is that what you just said?
No, when he would come, he was frequently at a business lunch with the VPs.
And he would come to your house? But
then in the evening, he would occasionally come to the house. So there was 4 or 5 occasions when, and my father and Lindbergh were about the same height. And mm-hmm. I think...
Stude was 6'4".
And so, they knew each other, and they were operations guys. Mm-hmm. My father flew survey flights. Lindbergh flew survey flights. Mm-hmm. They were in the airline and were enduring all the same frustrations with the equipment. Mm-hmm. And when we went to Miami, my father's job, again, like San Francisco, was to shut down Dinner Key and to bring up 36th Street, what's now Miami International Airport. Mm-hmm. And Lindbergh was an advisor, a senior advisor to the airline, not only about routes and business, but technology and that sort of thing. And that was what my father did.
That's incredible.
Natural. I mean, as an operations manager, he has a natural tendency to be affiliated. Mm-hmm. But my dad had other jobs. I sent you a picture, by the way, of my father with Clark Gable.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, you did. Yes.
And my dad would occasionally be asked to take some of the VIPs out. Mm-hmm. Pan Am had their last seaplane tender. Pan Air 21. It was up the Miami River. Was at the disposal of the people who were seniors to to take out guests and to entertain and be a VIP boat, well maintained. So there was a lot of stories around. My father was a big waterman. My father was a big hunter. My father was a big sailor. So when you had to go out of the business office and hand these people over to somebody who could take them off on an adventure, they handed them off to my father. So
Interesting. As we're nearing the end of our episode, Diane and Bill, is there anything you'd like to add to our conversation?
You had asked me about my first trip with Pan Am.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I answered it as openly, perhaps. My first Pan Am trip was a 2-week trip across the Pacific to Tokyo and through to Jakarta, Indonesia. I swiftly learned how world politics affected this world-circling airline. The captain singled me out, suggesting that as I was English, not to speak with anyone. I would be confined to my room, and any room service was to be ordered by my roommate. I learned there were current tensions between the governments of Indonesia and the UK, and he wanted to avoid any innocent offense. Not everybody realizes how Pan Am affected history and vice versa. History also affected Pan Am. That was affecting me on a very singular basis, but it goes to illustrate that you were a world-class airline, you had to be concerned. I had not read the papers that day. I had no idea. But he was on top of it.
Wow, that's interesting. What year do you think that was? Well, 1963.
1963.
Interesting.
It was 1963. And I haven't looked up what was happening between Sukarno and the British government, but there certainly were tensions.
Mm-hmm.
The jet was on the tarmac, and they had a guard on board all night long. For protection there. And the next day when we took off, I was in first class and I was serving coffee, and we hit clear air turbulence. But when you hit clear air turbulence, your first thought is, I'm leaving a country where you had a guard on board. Had they done anything to the airplane? Had someone been able to fiddle around with the engines or whatever? And I remember I spilled coffee over this passenger in one seat, all over him. I mean, a full pot of coffee. I sat down, and unlike Linda Frere's story, where the coffee came back down into the coffee pot, mine did not. Mine all over this first class passenger, all over his suit. But he was so sweet. He was more concerned about me, held me where I was on the ground at this time, covered with coffee. But yeah, that was my first flight. That was my first experience.
Nice.
I think the only thing I'd like to add, it's going to be interesting to see if what's going on right now can create a business case where we can see Pan American again as a licensed operator of aircraft.
Mm-hmm.
That will be something special for us, at the end of our life, since we lived with it for so long. And we've gone through all this amazing story with the Pan Am Museum Foundation, the Pan Am Museum, trying to get the museum up in a small niche on the mezzanine floor there at the Cradle of Aviation Museum. And I think that it would be nice to see the Pan Am in the air again.
Mm-hmm.
So, and see that logo and see if there is a business case that can be made for it to be seen by the flying public again.
Absolutely. Diane, any closing thoughts?
It was such a sad day when it folded and it closed. So yes, I share in the wish that to see Pan Am fly again.
And somebody needs to keep up with its history. There's a lot of parts of Pan Am's history that needs to be documented along the way. There are some great books out. Some of the books on Pan Am are quite special, but especially the ones that deal with Pan Am at war and things like that. So it is a great topic for writing history. It's an amazing era for somebody to have lived through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And, it was my dad that lived through it, and he was always an amazing, adaptive guy, and he loved the flying more than anything else I know of.
Yeah, he loved Pan Am. He was Pan Am. There were core people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there were people that were the financial people and the strategists and that sort of thing, and there were the people that operated the airline. And it was an operating thing. So really, when you think about it, and when you look back at the detailed history, it's totally amazing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to thank both of you for taking the time to come on this program. It's an honor to know you. It's an honor to have you on this program, and I can't thank you enough.
Oh, it's our pleasure, Tom. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for what you've done on the board and for these podcasts that you've produced. They're truly extraordinary. It's a legacy.
You've done a great job.
Yeah, quite an achievement. As many as you've done, the breadth and depth of it all, including tragedy and high points and amazing people. So well done, Tom.
Thank you.
You've done a superb job, Tom. I really must say. And you've been the glue, and you've also kind of shown where you can access history that we didn't know about.
I appreciate that very much.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Tom.
Pan Am was a pioneer in air travel and still stands as one of the most iconic and innovative airlines in aviation history. That legacy lives on at the Pan Am Museum in Garden City, New York, where you can explore the rich history of the aircrafts and individuals at the heart of the company known as the world's most experienced airline. For more information about the Pan Am Museum, check out our website at www.thepanammuseum.org. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. As was once a tagline in one of our commercials, we would greatly appreciate your support to help the Pan Am Museum continue making the going great. You can also support the museum by shopping on our online store for all things Pan Am, accessories, apparel, jewelry, books, models, and posters. We want to hear from you. If you have a question for us or want to share your story, our email address is podcast@thepanammuseum.org. As flight crews once said to passengers departing for their destinations around the world, thank you for flying, Pan Am.